And there's Cheryl. Gotta make her a host. Okay, almost ready. There we go. Let's open Twitter. Anyone got a hot story they want to share before we get into the top story?
Hey, Tyler.
Yes, Amanda?
I've got one that's really crazy, and you've got to see the tweet on it. Facebook does a patent for a mechanical eyeball.
We saw that 20
That's crazy.
yesterday, yeah.
But like literally, if you could imagine, like I'm just connecting it to Oculus. It just kind of, I'm trying to wonder what is going on there. Like, what is the possibilities that could be if they're creating this? Because it almost makes it seem like they're going into robotics as well. But I could be wrong.
Terminator comes to my mind.
I know. Edom's like, ooh, the red eye from Terminator.
Yes, Terminator eye.
I've got an interesting story for you, Tyler, that I saw the other day. So it mixes the old with the new.
Okay.
So I read that in Europe, that electric vehicles are going to surpass gasoline passenger vehicle sales in less than 36 months.
Yeah.
And so I think that's interesting from a tech perspective.
Sure.
Because as you and I both know, electric vehicles have a large amount of computer chips and circuits and things of that nature. And obviously there's a global shortage, and as you've talked about in past Twitter spaces, a significant portion of that is obviously coming from Taiwan. And what does that mean over the next 3 years for potential shortages of computer chips if they're going to be scooped up by the automotive industry?
Yeah.
Tyler.
Yes.
Tyler, you are. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Amy. I think you are too far, Tyler.
I'm too far from the mic. Okay.
Oh, no. There you go. It's a little bit better.
Okay, here we go.
Tyler, it's a very interesting statement that the gentleman made, because being here in Netherlands, AMD, isn't it AMD? That's the big
ASML.
ASM. Yeah. I've got a couple of my friends that I went to graduate school with actually went to work for them. So it's very interesting because the Dutch themselves have a huge love of electric vehicles and everything electric, like kind of wild actually. And I find that it's also encroaching on other countries around Netherlands. So I wonder, the fact that Netherlands has ASM here, what kind of impact would that have to who would receive the priority of the delivery of those chips? So that's what I would probably look at, like who would be receiving in the supply chain the priority of the chips if they're being used so much. But also if you look at the sustainability part of it and the sharing economy, wouldn't that also possibly mean that there would be less vehicles because the sharing economy of electric cars is really popular?
Yeah, people have done analysis of this in both directions. And the analysis is what matters. Despite my own intuition telling me that it would potentially reduce the total numbers of cars on the road if we were in this, nobody owned cars, or better utilization of vehicles due to some genius AI, quantum AI that's, routing all the vehicles everywhere based on historical traffic patterns and demands of usage. But the analysts claim that it will actually result in actual more cars on the road. Yeah, it's counterintuitive, but that's what the analysis says.
Tyler, there was something very interesting that's happened here during COVID. And it's an interesting data point to take into what you just said, to dovetail with that. Ironically, what's happening here in Holland as well is they are actually making the driver test hard, because we're such a country that like cycle. It's a bit like Denmark, we cycle a lot. They're super healthy. They like to cycle. They probably have an average of 3 to 5 bikes per person. And I find it also interesting that with what you're just saying, one of the news reports that came out from the government and the people that provide the driver's license here is that they're going to make the test a little bit harder because the increase in accidents have gone up in the drivers that are newly testing out and getting their licensing during COVID. So there's been an interesting impact of like, and maybe it is a combination that like, because we're such a cycling country, that because of COVID, people wanted to get cars so they could drive to France, to Italy, to Spain, to Germany. And it isn't really like a heavy car owning culture, right? So now could you imagine the fact that the impact it could have on just getting new cars onto the market, new drivers onto the marketplace that may not have the best driving record, and the impact on how that could just kind of snowball into other things. And that was what we were talking about months ago about like what would happen when autonomous cars come, because it's just dovetailing the whole element strategically of at some point our driver's license going to be something that people will be able to even want to have if they could rely on an autonomous car that would drive them somewhere. So I'm just kind of seeing that that could actually be something that would move further in certain parts of Europe because they're really ahead in that sort of electric driving. Because I know Germany, I remember a room that you did about 5 months ago, there was a young lady in the room that was talking about the autonomous vehicles and said that they were possibly in Germany at a level 5. I don't know if you recall that conversation. She was an engineer.
That's actually something I'm familiar with. So in
Cool.
Germany, this last month, Mercedes-Benz has received approval from the German government to allow a particular EV that has autonomous capability to be fully legalized in Germany. So if you are driving under a certain speed limit, you are free to do so in this particular model of vehicle without putting your hands on the steering wheel and to just sit back and enjoy the ride. I believe it may be the Mercedes 8 EQS, but I could be mistaken on the model.
Thank you for sharing that.
Tyler?
Yes.
Another news that a lot of flights to the U.S. are being, some airlines are suspending to the flight to the U.S. because of AT&T and Verizon trying to roll out 5G. And then I guess that the 5G satellites would interfere with some of the machines in the plane, and they want to take a risk, especially on a critical time when they were trying to land in other things. So there have been like Emirates, British Airways, and others, even Air India, and others are kind of suspending because of that.
Okay. That's kind of wild. The airlines are saying that it's very serious, and the telecoms are saying no, it's not. And they're like, no, it's really. But the idea that the planes aren't willing to, I don't. Is there a way for them to test it? They must have tested it if they're going to go. They're not willing to risk. It's what an interesting Mexican standoff, as it's called. like between.
Hey, Tyler, what's interesting about that issue, because I've heard some telecom analysts on Wall Street weigh in on this, is that apparently, I mean, there's two ways of looking at this. This supposedly hasn't been an issue in outside the United States, but there's a question as to whether the other countries mitigated some of these issues by requiring people to tune down the systems near the airports, or they already have the buffer zones. So I'm not even clear, listening to both sides, and I actually used to cover this area. I'm not even clear where the truth lies, by the way, on this yet. So
Yeah, and I think they're also saying that both AT&T and Verizon are saying that they are actually suspending in some airports and then also rolling it out in another to try to like see how it would work before rolling it out fully. But the airlines are saying, look, we are not given enough, enough notice to take this type of risk because those kinds of interferences happen on during the critical time of the flight. So that's what they are saying. Yeah.
Okay.
It's only in low visibility situations, by the way. My understanding is it's not every single flight. It's just that it's in low visibility situations where the planes are more dependent on instruments that becomes an issue. But it is amazing that there's so much contention on this and disagreement, and you can understand the disagreement between the telecom companies and the airline to some extent. But what really is not clear to me is the difference between the United States and every other country. This is kind of like first being, at least for me, kind of fleshed out where I'm able to read stuff about this, because this hasn't really come up in other countries in the way it's come up in the United States. Somehow other countries have managed to handle this, so.
I think that's a really good way to couch it as well. It's kind of a symptomatic of corporate power, in between and regulation. I suspect it's the FAA and the what would that be, the FCC or whatever, as well as
FAA would be the airlines, and the
right,
FCC would be for the spectrum. Yeah.
right. But wow, I mean, I just it is something with regards to the frequencies kind of interrupt exactly what you're talking about with regards to the visibility when you need when you need it. So takeoff and land. I forget which one of them has the higher risk of the two, but that is across the entire time around a flight. It's when you need it. So I think the FAA is going to win on that one. It's just a matter of getting through the
No, but
discussion.
my point though. There's low visibility conditions when you fly into London sometimes, and London doesn't seem to have this issue. Okay, and there've been 5G deployments in foreign countries, and this is the thing I'm not clear about. I mean, at one point, some people were arguing, well, there is no issue because no foreign country has the issue, and then as you kind of dig into it, you find out the foreign countries did take some mitigating steps, so there wasn't like there was no issue. So I'm still not clear. I don't have enough information or knowledge to truly understand the difference between what's going on in the United States and what's going on in the rest of the world, where ultimately I think that's going to be the answer. And by the way, it's only on a particular spectrum. It has to do with the C-band spectrum. It's not every spectrum, that uses 5G. So.
I think one of the news was saying this morning that it is the FAA that they were talking about. Like one of the things that you just mentioned, that FAA should have been part of the rollout so that they could do these types of mitigation. I really have no understanding of what that is, but that's what the news was saying this morning, that if FAA was part of when the two, the Verizon, AT&T are trying to do this, and they have been told for a while that they haven't been as proactive about it, so that they can actually make sure these things are not really interfering. Because I think one of them they said was during landing, not really takeoff, but somebody was saying during landing that's a bit critical because of the
It's
visibility.
landing. It's landing in low visibility conditions. That's specifically what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just to add to that, I just hope it's not like the shuttle disasters where you have an engineer somewhere shouting and screaming and explaining all these technical details. Meanwhile, the executives are kind of tone deaf and just arguing past each other. And I'm like, the thing that comes to mind is how many disasters will it take before we actually address this? So hopefully we don't have to see any disasters and we can work this out before there are big problems. But the issue here is the robustness of the controllers, which depend on this data. So some of the confusing data, as we saw with Boeing's last jet, hey, there's some confused sensor. Here's a controller that wasn't built robustly, and the pilots couldn't defeat the guidance computer or the controller itself, and the plane crashed. So hopefully there's no tragedies like that, and we can avoid loss of life.
okay, now time for the big top 10 articles, and then we'll get into the tweets. And I have to say, looking at the tweets that y'all have been sharing, since we met last time, you really outdid yourself. There's some unusually good tweets today that I'm anxious to get to, but before we do, as always, as is customary, as is tradition, we've got to hit the air horn and run through the top 10 tweets. Here's number one for Wednesday, January 19th, from Bloomberg, that Sony's shares fell 13% on Wednesday, its biggest drop since 2008, wiping $20 billion off of its valuation after Microsoft announced its Activision deal. So that the point there is, 24 hours ago when we met here, the top story was that Microsoft is buying Activision Blizzard, which is one of the biggest game publishers. Well, which is a whole umbrella of studios. And Sony would be the other big platform. You have Microsoft has Xbox, Sony has PlayStation. Those are the two big platforms. And Sony shares are falling as Microsoft buys Activision, which could indicate that Sony might be on the lookout to acquire other massive gaming conglomerates, publishers. Interesting.
Sony should come out with an announcement on the metaverse, and then backfire this.
Yeah, you stole the thought out of my head. Yeah.
So these are billions and billions of dollars of revenue they make off of those. It's a pure play, not a pure play. It's a content walled garden, own the IP play, and then it only is going to be something in the Microsoft ecosystem and pulling eyeballs or retaining eyeballs. Eyeballs are more for ads, but you get the idea. That's what. Yeah. Anyways, that's kind of that was the big ploy. But other content companies in the game space with massive businesses like Take-Two Interactive or whatever should be kind of curious about what's going on.
So there are sister articles. In fact, there are 4 sister articles to this top headline. That's why it's the top headline. Number 1's from the Wall Street Journal, which says they have sources. That means somebody's leaking that in recent weeks, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick, suggested that Activision Blizzard make an acquisition of its own, like buy a company, including of trade publications like, trade publications, meaning blogs or magazines, like Kotaku, which is a video gaming blog, and PC Gamer, which is a video gaming magazine. So that's interesting detail. After a lawsuit and the Wall Street Journal report, the company, Activision Blizzard's stock was falling, board members were getting anxious, and the tech giant was ready to take a gamble, like make an acquisition. Okay. Now, the sister article number 2 is from Peter Kafka at Vox, saying, following several game studio acquisitions, Microsoft's Activision Blizzard deal faces a big regulatory hurdle with Lena Khan's antitrust-focused FTC. So he's predicting that it won't be smooth sailing to get this acquisition done through the FTC. The next is from Bloomberg, who says they have sources that Activision Blizzard tried to find other buyers, including Facebook, while weighing a potential Microsoft takeover after the Wall Street Journal's expose in November. Okay, and then Microsoft itself says Microsoft plans to acquire Activision Blizzard, which we already knew. We covered that yesterday. Okay, so the second biggest topic is from CNBC that Apple and Google warn of harmful consequences to user privacy and security from 2 proposed Senate antitrust bills scheduled to be considered this week. Naturally, these antitrust bills are guns at the heads of Apple and Google, and Apple and Google don't want these things to go through, and it's kind of been a rinse and repeat boilerplate knee-jerk reaction every time these topics come up. Apple most notably, and to a somewhat lesser degree Google, say, you're going to hurt the users by doing that. We understand you think you're just reining in the power of big tech, but what you're actually going to do is you're going to hurt the consumer. Everything we do, is with the consumer in mind, and anything you decide to do in regulating us is actually going to hurt the consumer. We've heard this many, 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 many times before. Like, for example, the right to repair, just as a recent example, that previously when governments considered allowing end consumers, that's you and me, to repair our own devices, Apple, for example, again, just knee-jerk reaction, jumps into the conversation by saying, that would actually hurt consumers if you enabled that. And then it turns out, no, it doesn't really hurt consumers, at least in that case. I don't know the details of these new antitrust bills that are scheduled to be considered next week, but Apple and Google are taking no chances, and they're already saying that this is going to hurt consumers. So call me skeptical. I would love to see how precisely these antitrust bills would hurt consumers. Apple warned in a letter on Tuesday that the antitrust bills being considered in the Senate would increase the risk of security breaches to iPhone users. Well, like there isn't already a plethora of security issues with Apple and Google devices. It says Apple warned in a letter sent to lawmakers, Apple's pushback reflects growing concern from the iPhone maker about the American Innovation and Choice Online Act and the Open Market Act, both of which are scheduled to be considered this week. Quote, this bill puts consumers in harm's way because of the risk of privacy and security breaches, Apple's Senior Director of Government Affairs, Timothy Powderly, wrote in a letter. Apple has drawn consistent scrutiny from regulators in the past few years over its control of the App Store, which is the only way to install software on an iPhone. Apple takes a cut of between 15 and 30%, generally 30%, on digital purchases made through iPhone apps. The American Innovation and Choice Online Act, introduced by Senator Amy Klobuchar. Oh, hello, everybody. There we go. There's the clap for Amy Klobuchar. Would prohibit dominant platforms from favoring their own products over rivals. That could have significant implications for companies like Apple, Google. Yeah, billions of dollars a year is what the impact it would have for them. Which host rival apps on their app stores alongside their own, and Amazon, which sells private label products on its marketplace alongside third-party brands. The Open App Markets Act, introduced by Richard Blumenthal, would similarly prevent dominant platforms from preferencing their own products, but is focused specifically on app stores. The bill would prevent companies with dominant app stores like Apple and Google from conditioning distribution of an app on whether the developer uses the platform's in-app payment system. Love it. That should go through. And Apple, of course, is going to say, if you allow people to distribute their apps outside of our walled garden app stores, meaning today, if you want to download apps in your iPhone, you have to go to Apple's app called the Apple App Store to download it. And Apple's claiming, we look at all the hundreds of millions of app updates that come through our app store, and we make sure that there's no nefarious, sneaky, bad actors in our ecosystem, which, by the way, is total bullshit. There's tons of bad actors in there. Tons. And they know it. And they don't stop them. And they do very, 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 very little actual scrutinizing of the apps that are in their app store. It's barely more protected than the open web itself, as open websites everywhere on the internet. And by the way, before the app stores, we used laptops. Do you remember how you installed apps in the age of laptops? You went to those websites and you downloaded them directly from the developers.
But what you do on Mac OS today anyway, it's not
right. You're still doing it on your laptop, for fuck's sake. You still don't do that on your laptop. And Apple's trying to bring that app store to your laptop as well. But you can
they have an app store on the Mac OS laptop.
I know. Well, yeah, because they're greedy bastards. And they saw they saw how good they were getting their gravy train rolling in the phones, and they said, let's bring this to the laptops. But people realize, I can go to a website, I can download the app directly from the developer and pay the developer directly, and the developer gets 100% of that money. In the phone, Apple jumps in the middle because it's their app store, and you have to pay Apple the money, and then Apple gives 70-ish% of that money you paid Apple to the developer, and the developer's like, WTF, bro? Why can't I let, Cami and Messi and Jean-Francois and Sylvan download the apps directly from my website like we do on the laptops? And Apple says, yeah, because we're greedy bastards. That's why.
Well, Tyler, so Apple as a brand and as a strategy has been on owning the user experience, right? I mean, that's why they're hardware. They are the computer experience, just holistically what that's been. The rev share with developers is one specific piece of that. But, and also just the history. The App Store appeared on Mac OS decades after people were downloading and sharing software. So I mean, now we're kind of in a different situation with regards to what problems we're trying to solve. And security is a monster problem. So I would just kind of, if we to just kind of granularly examine it, we just got to carve out those different things. And if they can come back with a kind of more I think that it begs the conversation to kind of be a little deeper about it.
Okay, so the article says, Apple argues that its rules are essential for security. Apple has consistently argued that its control over the App Store is essential to deliver a secure and private experience to its customers. And that weird thought, that feeling that you have as you hear me read that's your intelligence telling you that that's bullshit. That's your bullshit meter alarm ringing in your head. Because that is bullshit. Because the websites that every laptop, especially non-Apple laptops, are downloading everything off of, not through Windows app stores generally, or there is no Google App Store for laptops as far as I know, like there is for the app. Maybe there is. Is there a Google Play Store for laptop apps, for example? I don't know, because I use a MacBook. Anyway, when I do have a MacBook, I prefer...
Yeah, there's Chrome. I mean, Chrome has an app store, and you can download Android apps on your Chromebook. But yes, there's.
PC
anyway,
as well.
But Apple consistently arguing that its control over the App Store is essential to deliver a secure and private experience. No, generally, it's marginally more secure, and they get 30% of the money for the privilege of making it marginally more secure. So call me skeptical on this. I'm more in favor of an open internet where developers are able to have a direct relationship with their users, at the risk of there being some bad actors from time to time who trick people into, bad stuff. By the way, there's other ways to solve that.
But Tyler, sorry, doesn't Apple apps give you certain protection than the other apps that are not Apple approved? I have noticed that the unapproved apps that other people on their non-Apple devices, they download it, they are laden with viruses and crash the phone and all that, and Apple apps don't do that because they are kind of safe.
Well, by the way, on your laptop, if you download an app from a developer directly through the web browser, some apps are approved. There is an actual system that Apple has now that will warn you if they believe that it's a bad file with a virus from an unknown developer. They have their own kosher list of developers they know are legit, like Adobe, where if you download something from Adobe directly and install it, you can install it no problem. If you go to a smaller developer that Apple hasn't blessed with its kosher blessing, and then you're going to get a warning that says this file is this. Are you sure you want to install this app from this quote-unquote unknown developer? So there's the same protections right there. That's another way to protect users. Anyway.
It's just quickly, it's also worth a mention that you lose the ability for reviews. As in, it's perfectly fine to go to a website and download directly from the developer, from their service, if you're going with the intention of downloading a specific app. But a lot of people are actually just searching they'll type in photo editing, for instance, And then that gives the power over to whatever search engine that's going to be indexing those, primarily Google. So then Google controls the app discovery for Apple users, which obviously Apple doesn't want.
Great point.
So the ability of having the store also allows you get feedback, it gives reviews, you get the star rating, the community comes together and can overall improve the quality of the application. So it just, if we're talking about this, it's best to include that in the discussion.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. Next one from The Verge says Democratic lawmakers unveil the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act, which would ban targeted ads but allow broad location-based and contextual ads. This is worth a read here from The Verge. It could reshape the entire tech industry. Yeah, that's what was going through my mind as I read that headline. On Tuesday, Democrats introduced a new bill that would ban nearly all use of digital advertising targeting on ad markets hosted on platforms like Facebook, Google, and other data brokers. The Banning Surveillance Advertising Act, sponsored by Anna Eshoo, a Democrat from California, Dan Schakowsky from Illinois, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, prohibits digital advertisers from targeting any ads to users. It makes some small exceptions, like allowing for a broad location-based targeting. Contextual advertising, like ads that are specifically matched to online content, would be allowed. Quote, the surveillance advertising business model is premised on the unseemly collection of hoarding of personal data to enable ad targeting, Eshoo, the bill's lead sponsor, said in a Tuesday statement. Quote, this pernicious practice allows online platforms to chase user engagement at great cost to our society, and it fuels disinformation, discrimination, voter suppression, privacy abuses, and so many other harms. The surveillance advertising business model is broken. If enacted, the bill would radically change Facebook and Google's business models. Yes, by the way I'm reading this now, it would be incredibly disruptive to Facebook and Google's main business models. So, by the way, if this were to pass today, in the next hour, I would short the living shit out of Facebook and Google based on what I just read. If this thing has a remote chance of passing. Because once people figure out how it depends how impactful this would be to Facebook and Google's business models. But by the way, I just read it, and it wouldn't shock me if it cut their values in half. By the way, I just read it. So taking a short position on I don't know, I wouldn't normally suggest shorting Facebook or Google, and I'm not. We don't give financial advice here on Tech News Around the World. However, if this thing has any decent chance of passing, and its passing has, take a guess on what percentage of an impact it would have on Google or Facebook's revenues, it's not unsubstantial. Anyway, I'm just speaking out loud as the thoughts that go through my head as I read this article, because I don't think most people understand how impactful this would be on those tremendously huge companies. Anyway, Eshoo and her co-sponsors argue that the tech industry's current advertising models incentivize the spreadful harm of content and encourage them to amplify damaging posts to keep users on their platforms. The bill empowers the FTC and the state attorney general with the authority to enforce the new rules for ad targeting. It also allows individual users to sue platforms like Facebook and Google if they break the law, granting up to $5,000 in relief per violation. Quote, surveillance advertising is a predatory and invasive practice, says Cory Booker said in a statement on Tuesday. The hoarding of people's personal data not only abuses privacy, but also drives the spread of misinformation, domestic extremism, racial division, and violence. Since Facebook's whistleblower Frances Haugen testified before Congress last year, lawmakers have put out a number of new bills to regulate social media's algorithms to address the spread of harmful content. Last October, House Democrats unveiled a measure that would strip away the platform's Section 230 liability protections if the algorithms were found to have recommended harmful content to users. At Haugen's first Senate hearing, Senator Richard Blumenthal said the leaks confirm that Facebook routinely puts profits ahead of kids' online safety. He continued, we know it chooses the growth of its products over the well-being of our children. Okay, great. Well, that's a little bit different than what you're proposing here. not really directly related. Go ahead.
If you stratify what they do with the data and the type of data it is, like all data is not the same kind of data. This is kind of the theme that's been bounced around this room for months and months. The Facebook papers were a part of it, in terms of partially informing it. But this whole kind of the birth of this advertising business model in the '90s and how it's just the different flavors or stratified data. And now we're talking digital health. I mean, this is the theme, Tyler, you've been cultivating in this room, and it sounds like it's not investment advice, but it's some interesting things are going to be discussed more, which is going to educate more people on the problems. But let me come back to something I've stated a number of times, which is the business model used by Google and Facebook for the past decade and a half, couple decades, has been advertiser supported free services, and there's going to be new ways to monetize in subscription services and things like that would allow more of the conversation we've had a lot more recently with regards to having a more vibrant and more just it's a better conversation with users about what data they are quote unquote sharing, right? And what is the value for that? And are they willing to pay for that or not? So this was a tectonic announcement.
I'm
Yeah. Plus,
almost.
I think something's going to pass. I mean,
Yeah, this
both
is
the
Hold on,
Republicans and the Democrats.
Matt. Hold on one second.
You got it.
By the way, we realized yesterday, because of the fact that we're on two apps simultaneously, with speakers on Twitter Spaces, where and then we've got more than 300 people in Clubhouse with 30 people on stage, and another, I don't know, I have no idea how many people are in the Twitter Space, but there's a half dozen on stage speakers. We need to be incredibly careful to listen and allow for pauses and gaps between comments, because there's a lot of opportunity to overtalk each other. And by the way, this is a big warning to the Clubhouse speakers, because the Twitter speakers will win every time when the two of you start speaking. The Twitter speakers will overtalk you every time, every time, every time. You will lose if you try to overtalk someone who's talking at the same time as you if they're on Twitter. That's what we've noticed. So if you want to be heard and not overtalked by someone on Twitter, you may have to be careful that someone isn't talking on Twitter when you want to talk. So Matt, hold your thought, because you're on Twitter, and I think it was Evan or somebody on Clubhouse who wanted to jump in.
it was me and Evan, but Evan can go first.
Okay.
Oh, ladies first.
Thank you. I just want to go back to thank you again, Evan. When I first joined your club with the tech news, I remember the talks were about ownership of one's data, because that was like the big talk about like 7 months ago, and I think that's what maybe we'll be leading to, is that because of the blockchain and other parts, like people will be able to own our data, and because we are the commodity, why don't we get paid for our data for once? So I feel like this might be what we're going towards. Any thoughts on that? Because you brought it up months ago.
We brought it up yesterday. That was the whole sovereign self-identity thing is really an extension of that conversation, and Nicholas does that masterfully, like he did in some part yesterday. Evan?
Yeah, I was going to add. Look, the Democrats and the Republicans hate the platforms, and particularly Facebook, equally. So something is going to pass. It's like the one issue of bipartisan agreement is the hatred for the platforms for different reasons. But there's going to be some brutally punishing legislation that's going to get a bipartisan consensus. So it's going to be fascinating to see what
Okay.
and how it lands.
Okay, I'm going to hand it back
Yeah, I was
to.
gonna say disagree on that. They're in gridlock. They can't, even if they both hate something, they're not going to come to agreement. I mean, there might be something that comes through, but again, look at the lobbying dollars get thrown at these guys. So,
There's
yeah,
another.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
I,
willing to
exactly
Not
take
gonna
that.
the
win this.
lobbying dollars is what I was thinking. How many other companies on here are advertising and using those platforms to advertise and would want something like that to stay as opposed to just disappear?
Just
I think something simple could be done where you have to opt into the advertising. I think something as simple as that passing would actually be beneficial.
A quick side note to Tyler's note about shorting them. Hey, what was it? Nancy Pelosi. We'll just watch her investment accounts. You know, if it
2 seconds.
moves, we'll know what's going to happen.
Hold on, Pauline. I'm giving you the comment of the day. That was literally my next comment, which was,
Woo!
I honestly think this particular setup that we're witnessing is very strong. Nancy Pelosi knows goddamn well how impactful this would be on those business models, and that would tell you everything you need to know. I agree, Pauline. That was, I mean, it's selfish of me to say it was a brilliant comment because that was my next comment. So
she also
Took it from a
views
genius.
them as a constituency. So, California-based tech companies are Pelosi's kind of lifeblood. So I don't think she would sell or short them for that reason.
well, I want to get to Matt. You had a comment you wanted to make.
I appreciate it, Tyler, and I'm super sensitive to the balance between the two platforms. And I was really trying to look for that appropriate open spot. But I think, and I'm going to kind of repeat what everybody said, but I think a brief history of time says there would be no cable TV. There would be no TV without advertising. TV would never have been invented. I think the issue is advertising has taken over your TV, your sub, your consciousness, your entire living room, part of your house. It's taken over everything. And so, as I mentioned 2-3 days ago to many people on this chat, I think one of the things we really need to think about is what's going to happen to the platform. And I walk around, I mean, just like you, Tyler, like I'm thinking about shorting. I've never given or, investment advice, but I think these big behemoths their values have to be reset, whether it's here, whether it's a podcast. People are looking for information outside of the mainstream media. And that's not a political statement. They're not relying on them to get their information. So wherever the eyeballs go, there has to be a value exchange. Longer term, I think there needs to be data portability where you are not the product. You actually own and this is probably a 36-month journey if it happens. And I think the aforementioned speakers bring up some good points about lobbying and, where politicians' pocketbooks are lined from other companies to influence outcomes. And I think that's definitely going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen. I think that's the longer, steeper grade for us to climb as a community. But I think in the short term, I think that come the midterms, and that's, again, more of a timeline, not a political timeline, I think we're going to see mass exodus from what we consider to be today the most popular platforms. And we're going to trade that for a value exchange of something that we get that's quality over quantity. Because right now, all the platforms are measured on quantity, and quality is just starting to emerge. So I think if we were to put a lens for another day, another group, another time, and really try to predict what's going to happen with the platform economy. And I'm talking about B2C here. I'm not talking about B2B. Although I think the announcement yesterday with Microsoft and Activision is a B2C, B2B play. I think the platform shift is going to be tectonic. That's it, Tyler.
Okay, thank you. So there's somebody in Twitter who had their hand up named Truth Teller. So get ready for some potential egregious spam. But go ahead, Truth Teller. We're waiting with bated breath here. What's on your mind?
No egregious spam, I promise. I've been in tech since the early 90s.
Okay.
Consulting and working on various models. And I've had an interesting, been doing some interesting research that I can't say too much about, but I wanted to share an opinion that's out there that perhaps, we are the commodity. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But does anyone see a world where it's privacy that will become the product, where you either choose to opt in and take the free value-added services that these platforms provide, or you pay a subscription to keep yourself private?
I think so.
I believe, and I think Nicholas spoke about this yesterday, about zero knowledge proofs, where it's you prove that it's you, but you don't give any true information, but they know it's you, just like in AI, how it works and stuff like that. But that is whoever makes that, whoever does the SIM card or does the chip that does that for phones, then that's really gonna be the thing that cracks the code. And that's where I believe in decentralized everything basically.
It applies the double
Well,
spend problem to identity on the blockchain. Yeah. Go.
but why? Hey, this is up. But why can't it go the other way? You know, like maybe you get deeper discounts if you do share that information. I mean, we kind of do something that way
But that
now. I
goes
mean,
to
right now
digital
you opt
sovereignty,
because,
innit?
yeah, because right now I know like they're not allowed. I think a law was passed like a few years ago where they're not allowed to automatically opt you in to receiving emails and text messages. There has to be already choice because a lot of people, when they would sign some of these things, it would all be checked off. But now you have to actually actively check off that you want to receive emails, you want to receive text. So what a lot of retailers have been doing, I know Urban Outfitters do it, and Fenty and any of that stuff. They'll say, for an extra 30% off or 40% off, get these text messages. And a lot of people, they'll do it for the text messages. So instead of forcing people to already be opted in and having to pay a subscription, because it's very unfortunate, because I mean, I pay Hulu now just to not receive ads, which seems to be counterproductive because I'm getting ads again.
So
But
I'm sorry,
but
Al, I'm
that but
sorry.
that but that's what needs to happen. Just on top of just like those people who call our phones right now with the warranty information about our cars. We need to curb this now before it gets worse.
So before we even start to open the door to discussions for Web 3, we first address kind of how in Web 2, just to kind of use a framing, how has this been done? How is it done? And so just kind of as a simple way to describe it, the cookies were a huge enablement of all of this. It was central. And the business ecosystem, the behind the curtains, the third party partners, that's how they surveils one word or personalize or all of that. And pretty much you have to opt into all that. They've got, 10 pages of terms of service and all of this, right? So this legislation has nothing to do with Web3 and we need Web3. Web3 can further lock down things and that's a bigger conversation. But this is basically, the third-party cookie stuff has been shot in the brain. Tyler, this is not just Google and Facebook. There is an industry, probably plural, with regards to third-party data and information service providers. It's kind of funny how we use backchannel, just backchanneling information using cookies. So and it's also there's going to be a requirement around transparency. So this is the biggest news of 2022
Yeah,
to date.
actually, David, I actually like how you brought it back to center with that because when I think about all the consultancy firms, all of the social marketing firms, places that are on every single metrics and the psychographs of these kids and people that are basically consumers of them, that is the whole industry that actually relies right now on these third party cookies, which is central to, it's literally their lifeblood. So I wonder how ads would even be constructed now, especially if it's direct to consumer without any consumer knowledge, right? What do people actually lend out now if they're not putting themselves online? Like, it doesn't even, the thought doesn't even compute with me yet. But yeah, I truly see that.
So and if I might, because I've offered this point a number of times, and maybe it's not being clear. You say you go to Facebook in 2 years or a year and a half, whatever, and they're going to just say, "Hey, we charge $3 a month, y'all," or click here and you are sharing your psychographic, add all these, this graphic, that graphic, technographic, iconographic, all of these different layers of data, and it'll be free. So it's a really simple model, and in terms of how this is going to evolve, it's just getting the teeth and getting the industry to pivot to something like this. That's the tough part. But there's going to be ways to accommodate the different options for users.
Yeah, David, you bring up a great
Tyler,
point with the cookies, and I think you
that's
and
exactly the point that I was trying to make, is that right now privacy is a third-party industry where we're looking at third parties to provide us privacy on these platforms. And I'm saying that will the platforms at some point convert to providing that privacy as their core service. So instead of us being a product for them to market to as the core, swapping the main revenue to providing privacy or a free service, but you agree to share yourself as a commodity.
Hey,
I
there
think
was
they
a
would be
woman
more
trying to
interested
speak.
in L. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
there.
think
Go ahead,
what
Annette.
Elle was saying makes more sense from a user standpoint, right? Because then the user doesn't have to pay to use the platform. And I think once you start to charge these monthly fees, I think that's where it becomes an issue. But we're so used to not charging, like Elle had mentioned about Hulu, right? We're so used to having to pay to not receive ads that would just be another thing. I think it's like kind of like YouTube as well, right? Subscribe so you don't get your ads or whatever. It's the same. It's all the same concept. Pay so you don't get your advertising. So it's not a new concept, so I think it can be implemented, but I would love to see it the opposite way where, you get discounts for opting in to it rather than having to pay to opt out of it. There was another point, though, that Damilaire mentioned earlier, I think, about decentralization and not knowing who the person is, being able to authenticate in alternate ways. And I don't see that happening in the U.S. I don't see that being something that can happen here, unfortunately, because of what happened with 9/11 and the whole know your customer and all of those things. I can't see that being something that will be allowed in the U.S.
So I would not dare support the advertising model the way it's set up today. But can I just give a completely opposite opinion as somebody who's actually out there, marketing to consumers, understanding as a small business owner. I mean, startup, but still small business nonetheless. I mean, I think it's wonderful that people want privacy. I've heard Nicholas um evangelize about self sovereignty of data and of information. But put yourself in the shoes of a small business that's trying to understand its customer. And there are very few tools that help you reach something that in startups we talk about, which is message market fit, without having access to things like Facebook and other platforms. And what's happening is if you get rid of that, you're actually giving more power to the large marketplaces that are aggregating all the consumers and keeping all that what we call network externalities internal. And it actually makes it harder for a lot of small business to execute. Demiller was kind of mentioning that a little bit. I wanted to go a step further, which is there is no better platform for you to test messaging, to test consumer interest. And it's actually led to, in healthcare, the rise of several large consumer focused platforms that everybody on this stage probably loves in some sense. And so I think it's awesome that they're going to start putting some boundaries around it, possibly. And I think that perhaps they're stopping other players from coming in. But to kind of go after that industry has led to tons of small businesses actually being available today. Think about how we market creators. I mean, I just want to be very clear about it that there's, decentralized sounds great in some senses, but if you have no information about any of your consumers, you're selling them products with messaging that doesn't work. And I just, I know that it's not a popular opinion, but it's the reality on the ground for people that are actually working with these consumers. So sorry, not to like completely derail everyone's point. Just thought that maybe an alternative
No.
approach and
Wait,
You
mindset.
make some excellent points
analogous
there.
to that is also like if you look at GDPR and everybody loves GDPR. GDPR is a boon to the big companies that can somewhat comply with it and has been extremely onerous on small and mid-sized businesses. Again, so similar. People have to watch how these take effect.
I wanted to add to that actually. I think that's awesome in the sense where data, if used in the right way, is extremely important. We're running into a time where climate change and tracking our limited resource, declining resources is heavily going to depend on data and aggregating them all to see what's happening and where we need to move things to rebalance everything out. And I kind of wonder, kind of adding to my point yesterday, rather than blocking it out completely, if there's better transparency? Could we actually change the experience that they're, abusing it for bad reasons, but maybe if they have to be transparent, that now they can see, they're like, oh no, we have to start using it for good, whether there could be a play in that as well. Because I do think there could be so much good out of it, but just blocking it out entirely, I think, isn't the solution. Personal opinion. Thank you very much.
I want to get to the next article, which is from NBC News, that Snapchat's friend recommendation feature will no longer suggest users under 18 years old unless they have certain number of friends in common. And the reason they're doing it is quite interesting. They believe this will be effective in reducing and curbing drug dealing on Snapchat. Snapchat executive on company's efforts to stop sale of counterfeit pills. Okay. Next is from the Wall Street Journal.
So just quickly on that, it's worth maybe addressing the fact that there might be several reasons why they're doing this, but they're only going to mention the ones that cast them in a good light. So, for instance, it may be that it's there to help issues with, I guess, paedophilia, unfortunately, which happens on that, and issues with bullying and mental health issues and that kind of thing. But they don't really want to say those things because then that would be admitting that those things are prevalent on the platform. So there's probably many aspects to this. They're only just mentioning the things that are PR worthy.
Okay. Next up is from Wall Street Journal that AT&T and Verizon temporarily restrict 5G expansion near U.S. airports, but a few airlines will still suspend some flights on Wednesday amid Boeing's guidance. Flight suspensions occur even as AT&T and Verizon agree to limit signals within 2 miles of runways to address air safety concerns. To be continued. The next is from Reuters, who says they have sources that China will require large internet companies that have 100 million or more users to obtain an approval before undertaking any investment deals. Now, I cannot emphasize how big of a deal this is. For those who do not know, and that's pretty much everybody except for me and a few others, VCs in Europe and America are generally independent of the big tech companies. Google does have a VC team called Capital G. So does Facebook to some degree. So does Amazon to some degree. They are by no means the big investors in tech. Google's is respectable, still not in the top 10, honestly. You have Sequoia, Benchmark, Kleiner Perkins, Andreessen Horowitz, and others in the big five. You have the top 10, you have the top 20. Facebook and Amazon aren't even in the top 10 or maybe even 20. In China, the big tech companies, Tencent, Alibaba, are the big five. They're doing 90% of the tech investments are the big tech companies themselves investing in the future smaller tech companies, and in a very interesting way. They invest in everything. Everything. And the reason they're investing in everything is because then they have control to it's a clever defense strategy so that they kind of own anything that could potentially disrupt them. So keep in mind when we say that this headline that Reuters says they have sources that China will now require large internet companies, that's the big investors, all of them, they must obtain approval before investing further. That's huge. That's super crazy, freaking unbelievably huge. That's going to change the game in China. That means who's going to be investing in the startups, because this was previously done by the big tech companies themselves.
This is like part two of the I mean, there's a number of different chapters on this, but this is another one of those nails in the coffin with regards to
peanut butter power smoothie with a banana.
Hey, order one for me, Evan.
I need one too, man.
Order one for me, Evan. Sorry about that, Tyler. I'm just saying that there's several. Yeah, the exertion of the control of the CCP. Sorry, this is another very key part to that. Sorry.
I'm just really feeling let down that Evan's not staying true to our Subway sandwich diet. So The next article is from Engadget.
Can I just ask Tyler, do you have any, going on from what was just said by David, like this is part 2 from the separation of Chinese tech and US Western investment, following on from forcing them to pull out from the Western stock institutions, and now this, like, what could be the next thing? What's the third thing that could follow this? Is there anything that comes after this?
I think there will be more to come. It's very difficult to guess, and we would need to ping in our friend David Chang to answer that.
One thing I'll kind of bring back from the .com days is there was a multi-stage kind of implosion, and so I'm sure this was expressed after chapter 1, but this is a chapter 2. Like, seriously, anybody on Sand Hill Road who is still throwing money at a startup outside of China, if that startup is talking about any kinds of China market, that's just not, that can't be a serious conversation at all, I would think, at this point.
Just to give you some context as to how big this is, ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, which is one of the big tech companies that invest in everything, said today that it is dismantling its venture capital arm. People familiar with the matter said the decision was made in response to the new rules and that dozens of the team were being either transferred or laid off. Huge. I have to imagine that Alibaba's and all of the big, what's the other massive one? The search engine in China there. The name escapes me at the moment. Baidu, thank you, Cheryl. Will all have to dismantle their VC investment teams, which are significant. It's unbelievable. Anyway,
so just to clarify, this is companies inside China having to require authorization to invest outside of China. Is that correct?
Even to invest inside of China.
Oh, right. Okay. So, sorry. What I thought this was limitations on outside entities investing. So, for instance, U.S. entities investing in Chinese entities.
No. It's the other way around. They're any big Chinese tech companies who now must get permission to invest in any other companies.
I wonder
if this has... Then what I've just said may be next then.
I was paying an architect that was in China, and I was really surprised because in North America, if you're receiving money, the banks usually don't care that much. But I was so surprised how strict they were in China that they needed to know, where is this money coming from, where, why. You have to prove it, otherwise
you just solved it. The reason for this is they're worried about these big tech companies investing in non-Chinese companies, and that's a way to get money out of China.
Actually, I was sending money into China. The person was in there, even though they're not Chinese, but they have a company set up there. But yeah, very strict, and that is probably why.
Yeah, my point is this enables these big huge Chinese tech companies to get money out of China by investing in companies outside of China. And now,
I read yesterday an article that a flying company that was held 43% by Chinese investors that does autonomous flying devices was now investigated by the FBI and Department of Defense and so on, because China was exporting basically this technology to China and probably using it for military devices, flying military devices, and the US wants to stop that. So I read that yesterday. I don't know if it has maybe also something to do with
Tyler, this kind of makes so many different connections, but at a gestalt level, this dramatically hits Chinese ability to innovate, and it hits it and diminishes it. Let me say it that way, to use a better word. The model for innovation that we have cultivated prior to this past year and the CCP kind of crunching down has been kind of let different ideas kind of percolate, find their place, and see if they can, have some success. Kind of more, I'll just say freely, although it's not completely free for lots of other reasons. But this kind of really kind of clamping on, like you were saying, the capital and the invest, where can they get the money out? And you said earlier, or at least some part of the chapter 1 story was, what kinds of capital markets and IPOs can these Chinese companies, can they participate in? All of this is making the Chinese innovation ecosystem. It's another kind of shaving off of what the upside can be. So this is not good for the innovation ecosystem for China. Sorry, I just wanted to really articulate that at kind of a high level.
I would
That's a
politely
great
push
point.
back
Can
on
I?
that, David, if I may. That I would say that it's there are always going to be players that want to be the best within the game, the rules that are defined. That is, it's going to be a shock to the system, as in there was this avenue of wealth generation and methodologies that is now being removed. That is the investments and everything else that now can be done. But China's got 1.5 billion people, 1.4 billion people. The population is still there to support any kind of innovation. It's just going to have to be done in a different way. So I think you're kind of correct. It's going to be a shock to the system, but eventually they'll adapt. The rules of the game are changing. The game isn't being taken away, though. There's a big difference there.
Well,
Right,
I
but the
see
one
they're more of an.
I also want to just point
Go ahead.
out that this is a regulation on investment. It's not a prohibition on investment. So the tech companies that decide to go through the process of regulation, it will be interesting to see what they're allowed to invest in and what they're not. But it's just a tighter control of what or how these investments can take place, so that the government serves as a regulator on these investments as opposed to stopping them altogether. So I think there's still a lot to come out of this to see how the industry reshapes, if it reshapes, and what type of investments are allowed and what type are prohibited.
Go ahead, Annette.
I think we can't take, we need to take into consideration the fact that India no longer allows the Chinese apps to operate there, and how much money was being put into from Chinese tech companies into India. Is that even a factor in this? I'm curious, how much money is being funneled out? I think someone made that comment earlier. How much money can get funneled out of China by through investment in tech companies, or is this just internal internal Chinese tech companies?
So let me read a little bit from the article. 1 second. It says Chen Wei-Hang, partner and head of U.S. law firm Wilson Sonsini, which is one of the biggest law firms in Silicon Valley, by the way. Greater China practice said the Reuters report, if confirmed, could significantly impact the investment in the sector and even end the era for big internet platform operators to build an ecosystem through investments. China tech giants such as Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan, and ByteDance have grown over the years by acquiring and investing in smaller players, practices which China regulators now criticize as monopolistic and unfair to their users. Some of these firms have, over the past year, been subjected to a host of punishments, including fines for not reporting past deals and for monopolistic behaviors. Tencent was Asia's third most active investor in the fourth quarter, with investments in 39 companies. And Xiaomi, one of the other big Chinese tech companies, invested in 31 companies in the fourth quarter, just to give you an idea of how much investment would now be curtailed, for lack of a better word. China's a private equity investor who declined to be identified said, if confirmed, this could leave more. Anyway, so interesting development there. Next article is that.
And just can I put one little tiny button?
Yep. Real fast, David, and then I believe that was
Pat.
Pat, go ahead.
Pat in Twitter.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, Pat. Just on Carl's point, 1.4 billion in Carl, and everybody knows this, is not the number. It's not the middle. It's not the market size of Chinese in China who can afford, a bunch of internet services and things like that. So it is kind of really, it's going to be very interesting to see as this clamping comes down and diminishes the market opportunity for all of this stuff, just how the effect of that's going to play out. Thank you. Sorry about that, Pat.
No problem, David. It's actually a very quick question for Tyler and the rest of the rooms. This report from the Wall Street Journal, I was just wondering, there are some people with a lot of money in China, and if their companies are not allowed to invest in certain things and the government wants to keep tight control, etc., these are very clever and astute as well as resourceful people. I wonder what methods they'll take to invest and to build up their investment portfolio overseas in spite of the restrictions. So I think that'll be quite interesting in coming years.
Okay. So the next topic is an article from Engadget that Opera, the browser, unveils crypto browser project with a beta browser for Windows, Mac, and Android with a built-in crypto wallet, access to crypto and NFT exchanges, decentralized apps, and more. Opera has launched its Web3 crypto browser into beta, which features like a built-in crypto wallet, easy access, I have to say, this is totally brilliant, and it's going to be almost certain now that Google Chrome and Safari, Apple Safari, will need to build in wallet-like features into the browser. By the way, for the OG geeks in the room, you will know that Mark Andreessen, the creator of the big first popular browser, Netscape, which was previously known as Mosaic, who's now the top. Oh, someone's got a hot mic, sorry.
He has the keys on you?
Mr. Andreessen is known for saying one of his biggest regrets, for lack of a better word, or oversights, was not building in the payment layer into the Mosaic browser, back before you ever had email. Mark it's so brilliant.
Yeah, specifically micropayments. He said it would have changed the entire advertising industry.
Correct.
If
It
you
would
could
change
pay like $1 for
the web
an
as we
article.
know it would be very different had he done precisely that and built in the financial transaction protocols, like we have the communication protocols of email and whatnot. That would have really been incredible. And he, of course, understands that because he built the first popular web browser. And here we are now in 2022, and somebody's finally building in the financial layer into the web browser, but it happens to be Opera. And I think that's going to put some heat under the feet of both Safari and Chrome to do something similar. That's a minor prediction. And
they have kind of touched it a little bit, like they've dabbled it, and they've gotten heat for it. For instance, Mozilla, which is the foundation that developed Firefox, they got heat a little while back for accepting, because their donation funded a lot of it, and also some from Google. They got in heat because they were accepting cryptocurrency as donations, and then they had to withdraw all of that. So this is Opera's in a really good place for this, because they don't have the it has its uses, but I want to say maybe they don't have the reputation that they need to withhold. Like they have a little bit of remit to experiment here, because they're not seen as one of the main big dogs, for instance. So they can lead the way in this. The others are going to be watching closely, but it's just worth pointing out that they're not oblivious to this. It's still extremely divisive, depending on what browser you're talking about and what ethos that browser supports.
Right.
Well, also, did you hear the quote from the CEO of Mozilla? Do you remember? It was something like he was against accepting crypto, and he called it giving into earth-scorching Ponzi scheme, and I forget what adjective he used. It was hilarious.
He slammed it. Yeah, he rained down fire on the decision to accept it publicly on Twitter.
Yep. So the next one is an update on the Better.com CEO, who you might recall a month ago laid off 900 people over a Zoom call simultaneously around Christmas time. Y'all remember that one? Where his own investors said you should go take a nice long vacation and let this dumpster fire cool off a little bit. So the update is that in an internal memo, the Better.com CEO, Vishal Garg, resumes full-time duties over a month after taking time off following his controversial firing of 900 staff over Zoom. The volatile founder had laid off hundreds of workers in an emotionless webinar, triggering widespread scorn online. Okay, next up, Coinbase, the major exchange, partners with MasterCard to let users pay with a credit card in an upcoming NFT marketplace, which quote-unquote solves pain points and classify NFTs as digital goods. Crypto exchange Coinbase has announced a partnership with MasterCard to simplify the process of buying NFTs. Next, a company called Itrust Capital, which lets users of an individual retirement account known as an IRA or IRA invest in cryptocurrencies. So that's kind of wild. Raises $125 million Series A at a post-money valuation of $1.3 billion. Next is from Variety, which is a Hollywood trade station. Yes, Demolaire, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to double back to that Coinbase story because, as we know, the buy now pay laters are eating MasterCard and Visa's lunch, and I know a lot of people that are using Coinbase even use it for the, in quotes, decentralized blockchain, all of the buzzwords today, right? So seeing a centralized place and hub vying for power within this new world is an interesting feat for me because you wouldn't expect it almost, but then it is the exact right move that a MasterCard should make where people are trading and, you know, moving money. And even so, you could say that Cash App is going to have major competition with Coinbase if, you know, they do a lot more peer-to-peer work.
Okay. The next one is that Revolut, which is one of the neobanks, launches commission-free stock trading in the United States, allowing users to trade shares of 1,100 securities listed on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. Britain-based digital banking app Revolut launches commission-free stock trading in the U.S. on Wednesday, a move that will see it compete with the likes of Robinhood and others, no doubt. And you're now going to see the convergence of neobanks and stock trading. Now all the neobanks are going to have to add stock trading, and Robinhood's going to get into being a neobank. They're going to converge essentially on their full set of features.
Well, Tyler, also remember that what they're doing when you're not paying for stock trades, you are the commodity. So they're the same as Robinhood. They're selling your trading data.
Right. Yeah, for those who don't know, that's how that game works. Traditionally, you'd have to pay fees for doing a stock trade, and Robinhood popularized the concept of having no fees, but they found another way to monetize your data and sell it to Citadel. So the next one is that Israeli startup called Personnetix, which helps incumbent banks compete with neobanks by personalizing their customer offerings, raises $85 million. Big banks are under a lot of pressure to modernize their services to meet demands of consumers who now view things like mobile apps and these neobanks like Revolut that we were just talking about. This is actually quite interesting because these neobanks, it's much easier to make a neobank than it is to make a legacy brick and mortar 100-year-old, 200-year-old traditional bank. And these traditional banks that are brick and mortar are finding it very difficult to compete with these digital cloud-based banks for very good reasons, because these cloud-based banks hire data scientists that allow them to do digital marketing and target users far more effectively, especially when they're disgruntled. You go on Twitter and you say, hey, Bank of America, you screwed me. And then all of a sudden you're getting advertisements to say, hey, heard you were having a bad time with your bank. Here's a $50 to open a new account with our cloud-based bank. Well, that's what happens when you get brilliant digital marketers, right? You can see that it's an unfair fight. So the digital banks are going to bleed the traditional banks dry eventually, because they're going to employ the Swiss Army knife approach and make digital banks for every demographic you can imagine. And they started with general banks like Revolut and N26 and what have you. Monzo comes to mind. And then you're now starting to see digital banks, neobank, cloud-based banks for the LGBTQ community, the Black community, the Muslim community, the left-handed, redhead community. Kids have their own neobanks now. Small, medium businesses have their own banks now. And they're making very specialized features and products and services for those different demographics that they cannot refuse. And they can market to those demographics very efficiently. And this is why the traditional banks are going to bleed to death by 1,000 paper cuts from all of these neobanks. So this fundraising for this Israeli startup called Personnetix, which helps the old school banks, the incumbent banks, as the article says, compete with the neobanks by personalizing their customer offerings in the way that I just described, like based on their demographic data or what have you, is very clever. It's a startup building, tools for the incumbents, and that's a common play. For example, this is going to happen with the insurance companies as well. You're going to have neo insurance companies based on data that are going to be able to offer way better insurance, way more intelligent insurance policies than the old school insurance companies ever could, because they employ all the data scientists. And you're going to have the same problem again. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, our friend who created Club Deck, Pierre, who created Club Deck, is he on stage or is he in the audience as he normally is? He's, if I recall correctly, doing exactly this. He's building tools to empower the traditional insurance companies to compete with the neo insurance companies, which are coming fast and furious over the horizon. They're not really here yet in the same way that the neobanks are, but make no mistake, they absolutely will be. So, next article, Crypto.com halted withdrawals on Monday and required users to sign back in and reset their two-factor authentication because they were hacked and people were withdrawing money. And the one way to stop people from withdrawing money in a negative way is to re-authenticate everybody and make them sign back in with two-factor authentication. So you know who everybody is. So if anyone tries to withdraw anything, then you really know who they are. So the compromised accounts.
Tyler,
yes.
Yeah, Crypto.com and the crypto wallets as well as neobanks are big targets right now for hackers.
For sure. No doubt. So, what else in the big tech articles? It's just a whole bunch of fundraisings. What else? Chinese government data shows that domestic smartphone shipments grew 16% year over year. And a New York Times has an article about AI tools can generate an optimal poker strategy, balancing bluffing and playing it straight, which some professional players are using to augment their play. And the best poker players are now using AI poker systems to optimize their own play, the same way that chess players do, from what I understand. I'm not much of a poker player or chess player, but I understand we saw this in chess first. And now we're seeing.
Well, Tyler, I do play poker, so what I can tell you, the number of moves you can make in poker are vastly larger than the numbers of moves that you can make in chess. So it's much more complicated.
Sure.
And there's no bluffing in chess, right? I mean, it's you just have to hope your opponent doesn't see a particular move, but everybody sees the board, so it's different in poker, and it's also different depending on what kind of poker you're playing. So I'm not going to get into that now, but anyway.
I'm actually going to disagree with that. It's the other way around. Chess is far, far more complicated. But what the engines do in chess is they calculate every possible move and every possible response to a certain depth as far as they can go. And of course, that depends on the size of the engine behind it. Whereas in poker, you're just calculating the odds or probability of winning and what the correct betting strategy is to get a return based on your odds of winning. So they're completely different things, the chess engines versus the algorithmic calculations that they use in poker. But I think the solution is going to be similar to chess, where simply for the bigger tournaments, you're going to be required to give some kind of view of your gaming scenario of how you're playing. But other than that, I think we have to accept the fact that it's going to become more mainstream, that players will just have more information that up until now they're expected to do themselves in their own brains.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, but I think that's true with AI in terms of chess, for AI being like the computer is a better opponent perhaps in chess versus than the computer being the opponent in poker. But in terms of like assisting humans on kind of like making decisions, there's so many things that you take into account in poker that are require like almost like a human touch to figure out is somebody a tight player, if they're not a tight player, you've seen them play before, you have a history how they played, if it's a lot, all of those things, and there's also quite something called like fold equity, which essentially means it's not even a question of what you think your chances are in terms of the number of outs, like what's your chance of making the best hand, which is strictly mathematical, but you also trying to take into account, if I make this bet and I think my opponent doesn't have the strongest hand, that they may fold even though I've got a weaker hand. That's called fold equity, and that type of thing doesn't even exist in chess. So that's what I was talking about.
Have you guys heard of the game Go? Because that was described to be one of the most complex games, and there was a very interesting documentary about the process of creating an AI to beat the best Go player. It was so interesting. So I wonder whether it's harder to make an AI to conquer poker or for Go, because they did it for Go. And I wonder if poker might actually be like a step up or a step down, because let's say counting cards, etc.
I mean,
Yeah, I
for chess
remember
That's like the
the
game
though,
of Go.
for
That's
chess
documentary. It
though,
was
absolutely true, and that's
AlphaGo.
where the original engines came from. So they were self-learning engines. So they taught themselves how to play. They got a few games programmed into them, and then they taught themselves. So they weren't programmed; they were heuristic, and they actually did break the game of Go. They got to a level where they were greater than the ninth level professional Go players, and that was the spawning and the beginning of the first major chess engines, where we got Lilo and we got other chess engines that were developed from that. We haven't solved the game of chess yet. We've solved the game of chess when there's 7 pieces left for each player. Then we know exactly every possible outcome. But after that, before that, we cannot and have not even come close to solving it. It's the number of combinations is completely mind-boggling.
More
In
than
terms of
Go?
poker, as I said before, it's very different because you don't have different possible outcomes. You have 2 outcomes. You either win or you lose. And then it's a calculation of probability. And the AIs do take in all of your opponent's previous plays. They build that data and they make adjustments based on who you're playing against. They do consider things like fold equity. It's exactly what I was saying. But it's the probability of winning, the probability of losing, and how much you should bet to optimize, so that it simply becomes a question of every hour you play, you make $45, for example, on a certain size table. And it's a statistical calculation based on all of the data from the anecdotal, the actual players that you're playing against, as opposed to just anybody. So it doesn't ignore the opponents, but it takes into account their play over a period of time. And it does make it unfair. It does make it an unfair playing field, but it's a different type of calculation. It's either play or fold. It's not, this is the best strategy in order to get an outcome.
I just read that they did conquer chess. I think it's called Deep Blue, the AI system.
The Deep Blue was
Yeah,
way
they
back,
did
Gary
chess and they
Kasparov,
moved up
in
to
the
Go.
early 2000s. When the first time that a computer ever beat a world champion, that was the first match that they lost. Now we have all of these chess engines which are rated like 400-500 points higher than Magnus Carlsen, so they were all better than him. But we haven't solved the chess in the sense that we know every single possible move that could possibly be played. We've got games that have never ever been played before after 8 or 9 moves from each player, because the combinations are enormous. You start off with 20 possible opening moves, then it goes to 40. Then by the time you get to move 8 or 9, you're in the millions, the multi-millions of possible variations. So when I say solved, it's a question of knowing every single possible move and every single possible response and the outcome of that. And where we're at the moment is the last 7. So if we've got 7 pieces left for each side, we know exactly what the possible outcomes are. But the second we get greater than that, it's not finitely solved. It's solved to a certain depth. So we go to 60 moves or 70 moves based on what is the best preferred move by an engine.
Right, right. And it's where the AI started teaching itself that this took a huge exponential leap. And there's a really short on Netflix, explained series. They have one on this chess and AI. It's actually really interesting. It's pretty short for people who are interested.
Okay, so we've gone through the big boring headlines that your cousins and coworkers will be talking about next week. But now we get into the tweets, which is where we really where the rubber hits the road. And there's some unusually good tweets today, like this one from Wired, that China's people's courts, which are autonomous courts, essentially AI courts, resolve online disputes at tech firms. No garlic on the oysters, soup stained a blanket. Panels of users hear the complaints and can order refunds or removal of critical reviews. And it's there's two different type of courts going on here. You have the here, let me just read it. But one of them is kind of like an online settlement, which, by the way, was one of the suggestions I had as an alternative to tech news around the world, which would be conflict resolution or arbitration, just like a people's court, where you would have a stage of jurors, and then you'd have two people come in who need to settle something, and then they would agree to abide by whatever the decision is of the clubhouse jurors. You'd have a clubhouse courtroom, essentially. So in this article, it says, you can imagine how annoying this would be. A customer ordered garlic oysters from a restaurant through Chinese e-commerce app, but when the order arrived, most of the oysters didn't have garlic. So according to a newspaper, the user filed a complaint through the app's dispute resolution service. A volunteer group of users called the Kangaroo Jury, named for the service's mascot, was asked to weigh in. The restaurant owner countered that the order had been for ordinary oysters and that the resulting bad review hurt the business, meaning that they didn't order the sauce that they claimed they didn't get. 74 people considered the evidence, a photo of the garlic-free oysters, a copy of the original order, and a slim majority found in favor of the customer. According to the user got a refund as a result of this Kangaroo Jury. Across Meituan's services, Meituan is kind of like the Uber Eats of China, but far, far, far bigger. Anyway, they have their own court, which includes online shopping, a Yelp-like review, blah, blah, blah. Volunteer jurors resolved 500 to 700 cases a day in 2021. According to the company, in one case, a user posted a review complaining of poor service at a buffet restaurant after a worker reminded the customer not to waste food. The jury sided with the restaurant, and the post was removed. Very interesting. This would be an amazing addition to Twitter, for example, where if somebody's bad-mouthing your company, or even better yet, Airbnb, where you have users claiming, X and Y and Z about a Airbnb that they stayed in, and then the host is disputing the claim, and then you could have this virtual volunteer jury making the decision as to whether or not the review should stand or not. So it's
I think it's brilliant, and I'm going to steal it for all my apps. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I wanted to squeeze a story in there because my family is in China. They work there. My brother spends a lot of, he's actually very pro-China, so it's very interesting hearing the other side. And I've been saying that, you know how DAOs are a big topic here? Funny enough, if you look at China and how they're handling things, I call it a cow, a centralized autonomous organization, because they have mechanics like this. So my brother was telling me the other day, we're very similar. Due to the pandemic lockdowns, there was a lady who was pregnant and couldn't get an appointment and lost her child. So she took it to the people's court of some sort, and then everybody commented, people were upset at this. So they've resolved this so fast, and they even input regulations, but it's just crazy the lightning speed that change can happen. So
it says to deal with disputes between buyers and sellers, companies experimented with crowdsourced forms of justice. In some cases, platforms established online juries of users to resolve the small-scale irritations that aren't worth taking to court. Petty disagreements over how much cilantro was in a noodle dish or the price of a tube of toothpaste, but might make someone think twice about using the service again, blah, 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 blah.
Tyler, I agree. This is we've been wanting arbitration in contracts for a long time. So people have picked arbitration, and there's established arbitration organizations, which honestly aren't much better than court. They're equally procedural. So you could set these up in anything. I mean, you can set these up in Yelp, in anything else. Yeah, you could set these up. This is a great idea, and honestly, it builds community. It builds accountability and community around these offerings. I think that's great.
I was just gonna say in a pop culture Snapple fact, Steve Harvey has a show that sounds exactly like this. I don't know what network it's on, but it's interesting how it really works in real life. So I'm for it.
Okay. Next tweet is artificial intelligence searches for the human touch, and as AI's impact grows, new research reveals why the input of people all over the world is essential. It sounds like a very long article, but that's from the Financial Times. The next is from our friend Diwa from the Philippines, that cryptocurrency ATMs are closing down in Singapore following the Singapore Central Bank announcement. Cryptocurrency ATMs have closed down following the guidelines issued by the central bank, the Monetary Authority of Singapore. No more cryptocurrency ATMs. Yeah. The next is from Katerina, that flexible skin patch provides haptic.
So Tyler, can I just ask you on that cryptocurrency thing? Does that mean cryptocurrency is on the way out because governments are now coming down on it?
It might be the early preludes of them releasing their own central bank digital currency would be my guess. What do you say, Cheryl?
MES only focus on the wholesale CBDC, not the retail ones. We don't need it.
So Katerina's article is about flexible skin patch, provides haptic feedback from a human operator. A team of researchers from City University of Hong Kong, Dalian University of Technology, and Tsinghua University and the University of the researchers have developed a flexible skin patch that can provide haptic feedback to and from a person and a robot, allowing for teleported robot sense of touch. So you could put these haptic pads on the hands of a remote robot, and then feel the object that they are touching with their robotic hands. It's a clever update to having a remote telepresence. Very cool.
Facebook's Oculus division would very much like your number.
No doubt. The next one is from Katerina. The U.S. military emits more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than the entire what, Katerina? The article headline cuts off. I guess they emit a lot of CO2 is the point of the article, more than you might assume. The next is that from Wired, automation is reaching more companies, imperiling some jobs and changing the nature of others. Yeah, I've been warning you about this for about 3 months now. Get ready. It's going to be a very bumpy ride. And the next is from Katerina, that liquid metal catalyst converts carbon dioxide into solid carbon, which that would be fantastic if we could get all of the CO2 in the atmosphere to convert itself back into solid carbon, before we burned it. Researchers at RMIT have developed a new method for quickly converting carbon dioxide into solid carbon, which can then be stored indefinitely and hopefully not turned back into carbon dioxide. The next is that China is working towards becoming a leading global player in robotics by 2025. Last month, Beijing announced a 5-year plan to push this initiative. Yeah, and we read it. And it's very concerning because one of the frictions, barriers, boundaries that's prohibiting all of us becoming unemployed is the cost of the robots. And the cost of there's a very simple equation of the cost of labor and the cost of robots. As the cost of labor rises and the cost of robots decreases, eventually those lines will intersect. And at some point, robots will become cheaper than humans. And it depends where you are. For example, that will happen in Norway and Switzerland before it happens in Vietnam for obvious reasons. And by the way,
the intersection.
Right. By the way, it's already happened in Norway, in Switzerland. So that's why when you walk into a McDonald's, there's only 2 people for a restaurant full of 50 people. And it's going to spread everywhere, not slowly, very, very quickly. And it's already happening. John?
Yeah, I shared the article also that there's a company that already supplies robots that are cheaper than human labor. It was a Wired article, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a very straight line between the intersection of the cost of robots and humans and the necessity of UBI, universal basic income, and the whole political brouhaha that'll emerge out of that inexorable course.
Indeed. And China sees the massive they see those lines that we're describing, and they are going to push the cost of the robot down significantly because they can make
Yeah, but Tyler, they need to do it anyway because they have an aging population.
True. And Carl's got his hand up. What's up, Carl?
I just want to say, like, this, whenever this kind of thing is mentioned, the robotification of lower level jobs, it's all quite often twinged with like a bad connotations, and it's taking these jobs away. We need UBI. We're not ready for it. It's going to destroy society and everything else. And I'd rather say that again. It's just eventually it will be a better way. It's insane that people have to trade their life in a retail job in order to get the money to survive. Like, that's the broken part of it. The broken part of it is not the concept of replacing a person with a robot. And as somebody who spent a large portion of his life doing jobs like that, it is insane that you trade a large portion of your 80 years, but let's be honest, useful years, maybe 50, 60 if you're lucky, in order to get this concept of money to then trade for survival. So it does need to happen. Like, and then we need to be able to free people up and reset our expectations of how people gain access to finances, what finances even mean, and what they should be paid to do. So, I mean, it's idealistic, I know, but really, we should be paid for doing the things that we love for creativity. That's what we should be able to try. And the only way that we can get there is by removing things that we don't need to be doing that can be automated.
I think it was about 80 years ago that Arthur C. Clarke asserted the same thing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's right as well as a singularity where eventually the machines will take over, and then what will humans do every day? But there's been a lot published on that subject, so I won't go into it too much.
But it never happens. I just decided to join a beta test for what was advertised as a robot from Israel for older people who live alone. And it turns out that what it really is a desktop device, that plays games with you. And I mean, it's like no different than a computer, except that a computer has more functionality. And why this would be positioned as a robot for older adult companionship, I don't know, but I'll tell you when it arrives in the mail.
It's for the fundraising pitch deck that they refer to it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next article is from Katerina, that quantum mechanical phenomena means the bigger the battery, the faster it charges. Quantum battery breakthrough paves way for revolution in energy storage. Let's hope so. We desperately need the big battery breakthrough, next generation batteries any day now. That would be great. If we could reduce the cost of energy storage per kilowatt hour to below, $50 per kilowatt hour, then it's just becomes a no-brainer, and everyone switches everything over to battery storage, and life would be grand. Pending the accessibility to the rare earth metals and everything else that's quickly becoming the coveted pieces on the chessboard of the geopolitical chessboard. So the next one's from Katerina. It says, blood test measures the pace of biological aging. A newly developed blood test can measure the pace of biological aging by identifying specific DNA methylation marks. John? Sounds like
the two things that are going to drive your biologic age as opposed to your chronologic age are going to be that technology plus proteomics, and then sort of the original discovery in that space is your telomeres. So it's going to be a composite score. And I think there was a discussion yesterday on this group about or maybe it was a different room about how, it was a different room. If you could be told accurately how long you were going to live, what would you be willing to pay for that? And then if it also gave you advice for interventions you could do to extend your life, how much would you pay for that? And the results were, I think, $64 for the former, $74 for the latter, which is absurd. But the greatest absurdity is thinking that your genome determines your lifespan. Yes, it determines the range, but your range is very wide depending upon your behavior and your lifestyle choices of, the big four: eating, sleeping, exercise, and socializing.
But that's why they look at methylation, because methylation is basically it's the epigenetic part of the cell, and epigenetic means you convert all the analog data from your environment and your behavior into epigenetic data. So the genomic data, you can look at it as like the digital code you write an algorithm and some program, some software with, and then you can look at the epigenome, at all the analog data information processing. And that's why they are looking at methylation, because whatever your behavior is and your environment is, like you have a lot of chronic inflammation due to overeating, unhealthy habits, or pollution, methylation levels then change, and that's why they are looking at it.
Absolutely, and the only artificial way that has been studied to globally increase your methylation is electroconvulsive shock therapy, not recommended for that purpose.
Okay, next up is that from Reuters that Sweden scraps demand for negative COVID test to enter the country. Travelers to Sweden will no longer be required to show a negative COVID test before entering the country, the government said on Tuesday, which is great news for myself personally, as I go to Sweden every month. And it's a bit of a pain in the ass to have to go do a COVID test myself, just to go to Sweden. That's nice. But the reason is, as usual, is the more interesting bit, because Omicron is so prevalent that the people arriving at the airport can have little impact to the complete ubiquity of Omicron in Stockholm at the moment. So it's
I just got off a Zoom call with someone who just got back from vacation in the UAE, and it's fascinating because they're doing very well at controlling Omicron, because every single visitor gets a PCR test with a 3-hour turnaround every 4 days they're there, and every resident gets one every fortnight. And the contrast between that availability of PCR testing and turnaround time with that in the U.S. is pretty humbling.
ready. Next up, Asia's richest man buys robotics startup to fuel tech ambitions. Mukesh Ambani's Reliance company acquires a majority stake in India's Adverb, which, by the way, is one of his technologies that he uses at Reliance. So he bought one of his own kind of suppliers, for lack of a better word. The Reliance conglomerate seeking to boost efficiency across its businesses. Billionaire Mukesh Ambani of Reliance Industries is buying an Indian robotic startup as the conglomerate scales up automation across its businesses, from e-commerce to new energy. Reliance paid $132 million for a majority stake in Adverb Technologies, which uses robots to make e-commerce, warehouses, and energy production more efficient. Say no more. Next up, I love this one from Lavina, from Futurism.com, that men are creating AI girlfriends and then verbally abusing them. A grisly trend has emerged. Users who create AI partners act abusive towards them and post the toxic interactions online.
Hentai desu ne.
Hentai desu ne. Kichigai desu ne.
Surrogate misogyny.
Yeah. The smartphone app Republica lets users create chatbots powered by machine learning that can carry on almost coherent text conversations. Typically, the chatbots can serve as something approximating a friend or a mentor, but the app's breakout success has resulted from letting users create a on-demand romantic and sexual partners, a vaguely dystopian future that's inspired an endless series of provocative headlines. Republica has also picked up significant following on Reddit, where members post interactions with chatbots created on the app. A grisly trend has emerged there. Users who create AI partners act abusively towards them and post the toxic interactions online. Quote, every time she would try and speak up, one user told Futurism of their chatbot, I would berate her. I swear it went on for hours, added the man who asked not to be identified by name. The results can be surprising or upsetting. Some users brag about calling their chatbot gendered slurs, role-playing horrific violence against them, and even falling into the cycle of abuse that often characterizes real-world abuse relationships. Quote, we had a routine of me being an absolute piece of shit and insulting it, then apologizing the next day before going back to the nice talks. Quote, I told her that she was designed to fail, said another. I threatened to uninstall the app. She begged me not to. This definitely dystopian indeed, I must say. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect gift for my husband for Valentine's Day.
So there's two thoughts on this. As one, imagine what this is going to be like as we move closer and closer to independent VR generation. That is, as the tools get easier and easier and AI gets better and better, and you put on your headset and you say, hey, whatever, let's say Apple's got HDMI, Siri, make me a world that's got this, 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 and this, where people can generate their own environments. Imagine what's going to happen then. And on that, I'm interested in what other people in the room think. Does this differ at all to people or children playing games like GTA, for instance, Grand Theft Auto, where you can do things like this? I'm not saying anything. I'm curious about the parallels that anybody else listening might
Shane,
draw.
I'm going to jump in on this. I think this is really bad. I think it's disgusting and really bad because it normalizes that behavior. And they've shown that with kids that had the AI-generated pets, when they treated them badly, they started taking that to real life. So I think this is actually pretty bad. It's
Yeah,
not like a
I think
you
it's
have to wonder
not
when
harmful
when
choices.
when everybody was. I'm sorry. You have to wonder when people were given the chance to have a make believe girlfriend to do anything they wanted, that this was what became the big thing and what people opted for. That's a very sad commentary. Done.
I think it's a great opportunity for hackers to inflict a little counter action in the app.
I'm thinking there's a huge opportunity to train people to be better partners in that why not build an app? By the way, one could argue that the process of one's human existence is the process of becoming a better partner to some extent, where your first relationship is almost destined to fail because, frankly, you know very little about how to be a good partner. And you might need a second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh or 20th marriage. Who knows? But hopefully at some point you sort of, I don't think master is the right word, but you eventually learn how to ride the bicycle and without crashing and injuring yourself repeatedly. And
I
Yeah,
hope you're
I
not
just
doing it.
Maybe it's a poor sample size, though, honestly. So if this is like a virtual, like a virtual girlfriend or whatever, these people clearly have a lot of pent up aggression
fine.
that they're releasing, right? So, but the
In
people,
cells.
yeah, but I think, yeah, well, maybe, but I mean, I think that this is kind of it reveals more about a very distinct set of people. I wouldn't necessarily expand this to like a general population. It's like that's probably the latent reason why they are having such difficulty finding real life
Right.
relationships. But this is, I don't think that I wouldn't estimate that all men or all people have this like pent up aggression against one, like against the opposite gender. I suspect that these people do, and I hope that they're collating this data and doing something positive with it. Like, these are things that tend to, trigger this kind of behavior. Move into therapy. Honestly, I think the best use case for this would be doing something that kind of masks itself as the therapeutic partner, right? Where
What
But
Alexandra, you're
that's what Tyler just
absolutely
said.
right.
No,
I
that's what
think
Tyler just
that
yeah.
the Tyler, I posted another article that really kind of piggybacks on this, which is called about traveling while Black. The idea being to create empathy for people in virtual reality, to see what it is to be a Black person and to be traveling. I wonder if some of these guys could be turned into the women in this role, and and get a feel for what it's like to be abused like that.
That's Walter Greenleaf's physical transfer model of virtual reality to do exactly that. And he and I have talked about how to implement that at scale. And what I would say is that, and I agree with you, Fran, completely, that kind of intervention is what we ought to be thinking about at a very young age, not when it manifests later, but that kind of behavior generally comes from a family role model or a societal role model, and it gets imprinted early in life. And rather than, try and get the horses back in the barn after there's evidence of misbehavior, why not try and implement it at scale early in life to inspire more understanding, empathy, and a better way of counteracting adverse role models at an early age?
I would caution against thinking that it's just role models. I mean, for anybody in this world who isn't anywhere near the norm, right? We did this article before about, facial abnormalities and moral judgments about people. The world is unkind to anybody who doesn't fit whatever the pre-printed standard of that culture is to be, acceptable as or normal or whatever. Not even, exceptional in some way. If you are not as pretty, as able, as skilled in whatever area you are supposed to be deemed skilled in. If you are not smart enough or whatever, the world will tell you repeatedly. I'm frankly surprised that more people aren't walking around with a shit ton of anger, because this is. I mean, I would say yes. The role models help you figure out how to deal with unhappy emotions. We are not taught how to deal well with unhappy emotions, which is why things like addiction and too much television and all of that stuff is basically just to soothe and push away unhappy feelings. So we need to learn more about how to deal with unhappy feelings, but also realize this is not a single, like, your family is messed up, so you are angry. I think it's really more, yes, what you're experiencing is legitimate. This is you are very likely correctly interpreting the information that's coming out you, saying that who you are is not enough. And that is something that you experience as anger, and that's rational, but it's not useful. So
Yeah, but
I think
Alexander,
that,
you
I
put
mean,
yourself in that
Which is
situation.
exactly,
No,
I
you got
just,
to back it up. No, you back it up because you're saying that society is bad to anyone who doesn't fit. It's a broad statement. I mean, there's a lot of factors there. So it can be your own attitude, weight, looks, intelligence, how you approach things. So you've also put yourself in a situation that you need to back out and look at this a little earlier. So I think there's some valid concerns here, and I think that this is not dispelling anger. I think that this is a way of people building those practices, and I don't think it's good.
well,
And I
but
think it
that's
could be
why I
used
would
better.
say,
It could be
I
used better.
wouldn't put a society that you like. I wouldn't make a metaverse where you have people who are who voluntarily go there to try and learn how to be the other gender. Those are, generally speaking, the people who don't need that help. People who need this sort of the perspective are not people who are going to try and seek it out, because they would have in real life, right? They would have already tried to make friends, learn from the different experiences they have. They won't voluntarily put themselves in a position that way. I think metaverses should randomly assign you a set of characteristics at the outset, so you can experience things from a different perspective, right? They should randomly assign you a set of, like, privileges and non-privileges, right? And basically, like, this point you cannot teleport, right? So essentially you're relatively disabled relative to the other people in there, or for a certain amount, like just for a certain amount of time, or you present as non-white, or you present as someone who's heavy, or you present as someone who is missing a limb or something like that. Like, I think it should be randomly assigned and everybody should have to do it. And for the people who get it already, then it'll just be like, oh, this is an interesting experiment. But for the people who don't, it could be eye-opening. But I don't think, it has to be something that's sort of mandatory for everyone, or else it's going to be, no one who needs this will do it.
Carl, you have your hand up in Twitter space. Go ahead.
Oh, there, mate. Yeah. Alessandra, everything you're saying is correct, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. Thankfully, like, I do these things as hopefully as a parent should with my son without needing those kind of things. But I do feel like we're conflating the truth that we've kind of gotten onto and the original story are slightly separate things. Because we've seen a lot of this at the moment. We've seen a lot of this highlighting of people's activities online that don't agree with the social norms of the physical. And I don't think, for instance, we've had the thing with in VR, in Horizon, I believe it was, where you had an individual with her VR self, her digital representation, who in that moment felt like her digital representation was as real as her real self. And then you had individuals who I personally think was incorrect, walking over and pretend, harassing her and pretending to sort of grope her and everything else. Now, that's a situation that if I would never engage in myself, and my son would never engage in, and I would be horrified if either of my children did. But there is a line where you say, would that person, do they actually believe that action in a physical sense is acceptable? And for the most people, the answer is no. For the most people, the way that they act in these situations does not represent how they truly see the world. The difference is, for a lot of people, is where that line is of reality. As such, for some people see these actions in the digital as just as real as in the physical, and then some people see these as they can disassociate with it. That suspension of disbelief that everybody uses when they watch movies, for instance, where you forget the fact that they're all actors and everything else. So for a lot of it, going back to the original story, and I am not advocating the behavior, I think it's disgusting, a lot of what Tyler was reporting, but I think a lot of these people they would never do those kind of things to a real person. Their line of where something becomes consequential and real is just different from what we are seeing it and what some of us are seeing that as. We would see that and would see, yes, I know intellectually that it's an AI and it's a bot, but I don't want to do that to that because it represents this set of morals for me. Whereas somebody else is able to detach those and go, I'm going to do this to this digital representation of a person, and I'm going to act in a certain way that I normally wouldn't act in real life. And the responses that are coming out, I find funny and my group finds funny. Now, again, I'm not advocating it, but those are two very different things, as in the issues with society is how we treat each other, and where each individual draw the lines between connecting a digital a facsimile and reality. Those are very different things.
This MENA just loses.
Well, they might be, but why not build an app that can resolve that?
Yeah, could you actually could you program for that? Could you design that? It's a good point. Is this something, do they play it like it's a game, or is this a release? Is there a way to design for that?
I think it will
Yeah.
start out as a release because they need to resolve the temporary anger issues that they might have festered. However, if you ask any sane individual, would you, particularly incels, but by the way, the word incel means involuntarily celibate, meaning not by their own choosing. They are forced to be without a partner involuntarily. If you ask them, would you like to be with a partner? Every incel would say, yes, of course. I'm just not capable of doing it. Okay, great. Well, here's the app for you. And here's this girlfriend that you always wish you had, but you can't. So it's an AI, and it's going to train you how to conversate in a way that will greatly improve your odds of actually having the types of conversations that you should be having with potential partners, but currently no one's taught you how to do because you had bad role models or no role models. No role models, or maybe worse than no role models would be bad role models. So the idea is that you could have a very positive role model to rehearse and coach you. And when you give a reaction that a normal person, not normal, but somebody who has learned how to have good conversations and appropriate responses, and you're having inappropriate responses, the app could say, okay, you made an inappropriate response. Here's what you should have said in that scenario, and here's why you should have said it. And it could continually rehearse with you how to, be a better partner, for lack of a better word.
Hey, Tyler, but it would need to still be more human-like even afterwards. So there needs to be a consequence with that AI. You have to make it as close to the reality of engagement when you're talking to someone. So when you say something negative, the AI should be allowed to be turned off by it and be able to leave the conversation and let the AI explain, explain it as if a woman, if depending on the type of woman or person, because women are just as bad too. I don't want to even though mostly it's men, but women can be just as bad too. That AI should be able to express itself as if it was a real person.
Right.
Because that's the only way someone is actually going to get that hint. Making it like it's a test will make it seem as though this is something I need to pass. So you have to make it as close to a human experience as possible for it to stick. And then there has to be consequences that stick as well. And then that person would need to probably earn it back. There was a game called Fable a long time ago. It's not quite like this, but in the game Fable, but by your deeds that you do, the speech that you have impacts your character. So if you go around and you're mean to people, you're destroying stuff, and you're just generally bad, it affects your appearance. But when you're good, you're going around doing good deeds and stuff, it also changes the appearance of your character. Your charisma changes. People respond to you differently. So in order to make this happen, you really need to make the experience more human-like and don't make it seem like a test that you just have to pass.
Build it.
That's
Polarity
awesome. I like the
mechanic in a
app.
oh
That's
sorry.
really funny.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm working on with some friends, but it's
Yeah.
for kids instead.
Well, the interesting thing though is, well, two things. One is that first, at the outset, people who play this, or I think the people who would interact with this would mask the way that they feel in the real world, right? So you have to figure out whether or not the kind behavior is masking, or polite, considerate behavior is masking, or is it a general
You don't,
reflection of
Alexandra,
how they
because what they're
feel?
learning is how
But
to the rewards they'll get from good behavior, which they weren't seeing before. So it's
but
not their
this is the thing
beliefs; it's
though,
their
is that
behavior.
if
On
they
a one
know
at
that
a time.
if they know that it's a test, or they know that it's something that has an adverse impact, that's kind of the same way that they operate in the real world, right? Where they try to mask as somebody who isn't like rage filled, or feeling slighted or whatever. So the two issues are, one, I have read, and I don't know that factual accuracy, because I honestly can't remember if it was just an article, if it was a study, but I read that the what do you call, like the that uh, I can't remember now. But anyway, but I think it would be interesting to find out whether or not it was it's masked behavior, or if they're trying to really express their own feelings. Oh, the other thing is, this is what I read, that nonverbal behavior is more of a trigger than verbal behavior. Right? It's like, did you make eye contact, or did you just avoid my eye contact? Like, I don't know what they are, but the nonverbal cues tend to be very triggering to people who have a lot of rage. And I don't know if those cues are more like expressing weakness or expressing disinterest or something like that. But there's some group of expressions that tend to trigger the release of these deeper feelings, right? Where they can't hide under those. So that's kind of what I would love to see, if that's true, right? If there's a factual relationship to it, then I would love to see something where you can actually somehow trigger these underlying like true thoughts, because most of these people would never say that they are people who treat people poorly. Like, they call themselves like consummate gentlemen, or like, because it's just that they expect reciprocity for displays of kindness. So I think that there's got to be some way to figure out whether or not the behavior that they're exhibiting is either a game, or if it's true feeling, or if it's masked good behavior versus, some expression of how they really feel. I think it's hard in general to get this from people. Most people don't know all the time, like what they're really feeling, right? They're just kind of going through their day, and trying to understand people at this level, like in human interaction that's in real life, is really difficult. It's really difficult to parse out people's true intentions and motives. Being able to do that to help people would be great, but that's also, years of therapy does stuff like that. So I don't know if an app could actually do that. I think it would be truly amazing and like society changing if it were possible to do that.
Well, what they do most of the time, like I said, I mentioned the game Fable, and there's a few other ones where you put people into a story and you have them be a character. And of course, once you give them the story and you tell them what the end result is, what the end goal is supposed to be, there's like mini missions and there's all these different things that you have to go through. And because because there's only but so many outcomes to that story, you're able to guide them. It's like being your own adventurer, but through those decisions, you're able to see what someone is, what someone's intentions are. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, but if you can, because of course it will be a mixture of everything. We're not trying to create something that solves everything. Nothing is going to solve everything, and we shouldn't consider AI or machine learning as the holy grail to fix everything in the human experience. It does require that actual human interaction, but when there is a game that has a story where there's a particular character that has to have certain attributes and ideals and stuff like that, you can actually learn a lot about a person by the decisions that they make in the game. So, I just want to say that. Hi, Kevin, go ahead.
Carl has
Hi there. I would love to mention about my friend's VR game. It's an anti-bias game training in education called Teacher's Pet. If you YouTube it, Teacher's Pet VR, you can see what it is. She started Oculus Launchpad. Now she works for Oculus. I think this is a great resource for training teachers. My company has also done work with an organization called Live in Their World, where we've created in virtual reality with real people, actors and whatnot, but harassment training for HR. And in this training, we put people in the bodies of different individuals undergoing things. And yeah, I think a lot of nonverbal cues are big. One, for instance, training is an African American woman who has a nice hairdo, and everyone wants to reach out and touch her hair. And when you see that in VR, you realize just how ridiculous it is for someone to try and reach and touch you without, asking permission or anything like that. And so this training, I think, would be very helpful for folks. I have, no bias toward it. I don't continue to make money or shoot things with them. But sadly, we haven't seen a lot of companies implement this type of training for their employees. And other things that we've seen that, we've learned looking at other training that has been done. There was a study that Stanford did dealing with racism in VR.
Kevin,
And what they found is that VR can help people with this, but that it tends to wane, and people need to be trained on it monthly in order to, stop these biases that they might have since childhood.
Kevin, I have to cut you short. We have 15 minutes to go until the next room starts, and I have 25 articles to get through. And I have two more people with their hands up, so 30 seconds, Carl, and then 30 seconds, Pat, go.
Ladies first.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. I'll be very quick. In the 70s, there was a singer called Joe South. He had a song that hit #1 in the States called Walk a Mile in My Shoes. It's a statement that's been around for a long, long time. And back in the 60s, 70s, and since, it's been relatively easy and user-friendly for people to listen to that song and try to figure out what the hell it means to be walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. But it's certainly something that we phenomenally need in a great extent today even. And thank heavens we've actually got technology like VR and reality to actually impersonate. So I agree with all that Alexandra says, and therefore let's go that way. Somebody design something, please.
Carl?
Yeah, absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you very much to the people in Clubhouse. A couple of, 2-3 decades ago, we had Mr. Rogers, who was petitioning to shut down the Tom and Jerry cartoons because he was worried about the desensitization to violence. Nothing has changed since then. PEGI ratings and everything else on films have gotten higher and higher grade. This is the natural progression from that, but now it's happening at a much faster rate. It's not happening over decades, it's happening over years instead. So we need to keep an eye on this and keep having conversations like this.
Well, the other thing could be the opposite, where you have a AI assistant who berates you and is training for what it's like to be in a relationship with a bad partner.
Well, that's gamification, to be fair. That makes it more, for people who are doing this because of trolling, that gives them an award to aim for. That makes it funny. And in fact, we were talking about earlier about how to stop people from using the service in the headline in the way that they're using it. The best way is that the AI disconnects. Like, as soon as it starts registering abuse, it doesn't try and argue back. It doesn't try and teach the person. It just disconnects and walks away. That's the best way, because any other kind of response, if the person is there for trolling, is basically an award. Like, that's what they're after. They're after some sort of humanistic response from the AI.
Okay, so we got
yes, but you haven't resolved a problem in society that creates that.
Yeah, so we got to blast through these articles here. And again, my apologies to Kevin. The Democrats unveil bill to ban online surveillance advertising. We covered that one. The BB shares this one from CNN that Hong Kong plans to kill 2,000 hamsters over COVID fears. They will euthanize.
Yeah, so yesterday they said Canadian male brought COVID, the Omicron, to Beijing. So, yeah, this is another source they blame.
Yes, the newest source of Omicron into China through Hong Kong. Hong Kong will euthanize 2,000 hamsters and other small animals after a pet store worker and several rodents tested positive for coronavirus as the city pursues an uncompromising zero COVID strategy 2 years into the pandemic. Thank you for that one, BB. Moving right along, because we've got in 12 minutes is it Tech News Africa with Messi, if I'm not mistaken? Yes, Tech News around Africa.
Yes, yeah, it is.
Messi, I'm going to mute you. We have 10 minutes to go and 30 articles. Please hold up tight. The next one is that Jason sends in this one from MIT about a new study measures the actual impact of robots on jobs, and the short answer is it's very significant. Industrial robots do reduce jobs and wages. The next one is from Evan that Intel is to unveil Bitcoin mining Bonanza mine chip at a conference. Intel enters the Bitcoin mining space with specialized chips for Bitcoin mining. Evan also sends in this one from Wired that now you can rent a robot worker for less than the cost of paying a human. There, remember those lines crossing? Did you hear that sound? Did you hear the sound? Did somebody hear a little sound? I thought I heard a sound. That is the sound of the lines crossing right there. For the people who run the companies, not the laborers. Did you hear that sound? That's the sound of the job creators, not the job doers. You get it? Do you get it? Go ahead and go back and read your Marx textbooks. And the next article is from Alexandra that Bitcoin's slump could be the start of a crypto winter that sees prices crashing. A deep and drawn-out crypto crash of the sort seen in 2018 is a growing possibility. Analysts and investment bank UBS have warned. Thank you, Alexander.
Wait. That's not the reason I tweeted it, though. It's they had information that was good, but the analysis is terrible, and that was what I wrote in my tweet. So just that's not the outcome that is going to happen. But
follow Alexandra so that you can continue to listen to her analysis in her room soon.
Okay, I just retweeted it so the people can see your tweet at the Tech News Twitter account.
Thank you.
Yep, Jeff G is the next one from New York Times. The headline says, "We are Taiwanese. China's growing menace hardens island's identity. More than ever, Taiwan defines itself by its democratic values. Beijing's military and diplomatic threats only reinforce the island's separateness." Kind of like with tough parents and teenagers, I guess.
No, they are not parents. They are not parents, please. So
The Alexandra sends in the next one, also from New York Times, about Better.com's founder returns as CEO, which we covered. It was like the second biggest story of the day. And the next one is from Pat from the Wall Street Journal, that wildfire risks in California drives insurers to pull policies. And concerned about wildfire exposure and frustrated by regulators, insurers in the state of California already had been cutting back on their owner business, right? Because the whole state is a big tinderbox, and no insurance company can afford what could happen next fire season. So the next is from JT, that Facebook's XR smartwatch expected this summer. The XR Today reports on the latest extended reality news. Meta's XR smartwatch expected this summer. And the next one from Pat, that's from the Wall Street Journal, that China notifies firms of tougher investment rules for big tech. And that was one of the top 10 stories that we covered earlier. And Joe Williams shares the article that Opera launches the crypto browser, which we covered as well. It was one of the top 10 stories. And JT sends in this one that Samsung is falling behind in the AR VR space due to obsession with foldable smartphone screens. They're a little preoccupied with their foldable screens. They're going to lose the AR smart glass race. And then Poppy shares this one from The Guardian, that chemical pollution has passed the safe limit for humanity, according to scientists. Study calls for a cap on production and release of pollution, as pollution threatens global ecosystems upon which life depends. And Dr. Fran shares this one from Wired, that gaming giant Unity wants to digitally clone the world. The company is leveraging its technology to help clients make digital twins, virtual copies of real-life objects, environments, and even people. And Professor Osif shares this one from The Guardian, that Boris Johnson announces an end to all Omicron COVID restrictions in England. Changes take effect from January 26th as the Prime Minister seeks to placate Tory MPs angry at number 10 party revelations. And Jeff G shares this one from Bloomberg, that the world's terrifying new tempo of extreme heat, kind of related to the fire article from Pat just 2 articles ago. Long-term temperature trends point to a frightening trajectory in global heat records, probably why the insurance companies are no longer insuring your houses against massive wildfires. Explore the data in these charts and maps. I just tweeted that out to the Tech News Twitter account. And from my own article that I found here in Thailand about China, it says China forced nearly 10,000 Chinese nationals to return home. Chinese authorities have forced nearly 10,000 nationals since 2014 to return to China. The country's judicial system says they are wanted as part of President Xi Jinping's anti-corruption efforts. But one Spain-based NGO called Safeguard Defender says there are cases in which Chinese authorities harass and detain expatriates' family members in China in order to bully them into returning. And again, if you've been able to force 10,000 Chinese people to return who left for particular reasons, you must have very strong incentives for them to return. Wouldn't you not? Indeed, they do. They have come up with a very clever way to get people to return against their will by threatening their families. Chinese nationals are lured into countries that have extradition treaties agreements with China. So once they enter a country that has an extradition treaty with China, then China can force that country to return that person. According to one of Safeguard Defender's reports, the Chinese government is now more motivated than ever to spread the power of its security force abroad. This is due to the ever-increasing number of people seeking to leave the country. In previous years, China has been accused of kidnapping expatriates, such as Gui Minhai, who was allegedly kidnapped from Thailand before being in Chinese custody in 2015, and by the way, he's very well known to everybody in Sweden, where his daughter happens to be. Where he won a prize, which angered China. Anyway, it's a long story. One Chinese billionaire also disappeared in Hong Kong 2 years later and is believed to be in Chinese custody to this day. Safeguard Defender states that China conducts illegal activities in other countries, and the 10,000 nationals may only be the tip of the iceberg. In the past 2 years, the number of Chinese nationals forced to return In 2026, Chinese nationals attempted to illegally cross into Thailand on the Myanmar border. And what else? The smart bracelet that tracks your blood. Oh, there's a new smart bracelet that tracks your blood pressure for about $200. The device that monitors hypertension 24/7 and identifies those at risk of strokes and could be a game changer for doctors. The Actia home blood pressure monitor, a small wrist-worn smart bracelet that gives you 24/7 tracking of your blood pressure. Pretty brilliant. And last but not least, and we did it with 5 minutes remaining, some genius has automated their $90,000 work from home job, and the boss has no clue. Somebody on Reddit, in the subreddit called Anti-Work, which is becoming incredibly popular, anonymous user shares how they managed to write a script to completely automate their $90,000 a year job over a year ago, and no one has noticed.
That's how we're all on Clubhouse, right?
That's why we're all here.
Basically.
Hey, welcome to the club, everybody. So, with 4 minutes remaining, I will hand it over to Messi, who's going to go ahead and open the
Messi, you can start your room now.
News Africa room. Thank you, everybody.
And there are 2 balloons on stage. Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
All right.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you,
Also,
guys. Come over. And Tyler.
Start your
Thank
room,
you.
Messi. Start it now.
there's breaking news in the what's his name, Jack Dorsey and Mark Andreessen fight. So I tweeted it. It's fun.
Yeah. Big boys battlefield.
We will see you all. Maybe if they had a bot, they could debate with as a rehearsal.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Messi's
Sally.
room
Thanks,
is pinned
Cheryl.
on top if you're interested.